One time I was walking, but I know I'm jumping around, but it's hard not to because there's so many examples that come to mind. But like in the craft itself, the house where we were living, it wasn't appropriate if they were walking around in the house. It wasn't appropriate for students to come up to them and just ask them questions or start a conversation. And they told us that because at first they didn't tell us that wasn't appropriate. So individuals would do it, and it got to a point to where they felt like they were being interfered with in the tasks they were doing. Frequently, they were going to students and answering their questions because they wanted to do it in person. Sometimes they did answer questions in person that people would write in notes because we had a note system for talking to them, and other times they would come to a meeting and address the questions in the meeting, and specifically to students or in general. So then they came up with a procedure that said when we're walking around the craft, it's not procedure to stop us to talk. And they explain that they want to give us, help us with our questions. They want to give us time, but it's not appropriate to just assume that what we have on our minds is more important than what's on their minds. And actually, we got that first lesson. See, these are lessons, but they didn't. They hardly ever addressed that kind of thing on the spot. Like even if somebody did that later, came to them, while they were walking around the craft and said, "I have a question." They wouldn't say at that moment, "No, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to ask us questions while we're walking around the house." Remember? Never. I never saw them do that. And they would take the positive side. Basically, frequently, as much as I could tell, and not consider that there might be an exception to this, to the procedure. And I'll give you another example. We were in a craft in a house in Amarillo, Texas, and in Amarillo, we did something special at that time. We actually rented a property that was like an office. It was an office. And we called it, T&O called it Astrologics. And we did astrology. Sunodi was an astrologer, amateur astrologer before she joined. And T was an amateur astrologer before she joined. And before she joined with Doe and awakened to their task completely. And one day, years before that, T and Doe brought in a whole bunch of astrology books, Alan Leo books, and horror astrology books, but the instruction was not to do our own natal charts or anybody else's natal charts. So basically, we started with horary and event astrology, and but then they allowed us the instruction expanded to where we could do progressions, and we did progressions on horary charts and things like that. Some of us. And I gravitated towards doing the astrology, and so did Sorority, and Havority for a while, and Authority for a while. But in Astrologics, I was assigned as an astrologer. I was doing progressions because we were actually offering the service to the public, and we had a few clients, and I did some progressions for a client. I never met the clients. I would get their natal chart. And then based on that natal chart, I would advance it, I would progress it, and then put my interpretation on it. And we didn't do many of those, but we also had we had a meditation room, and we also gave little talks And the way we give little talks, like Sorority and I organized a talk on spirits and ghosts. And we gave it, and a bunch of people from Amarillo came and sat and listened to our talk. But nobody knew that we were the UFO 2's students, and that we were basically considered to be a cult because we didn't advertise that. We wanted people to come. It was an exploration, but it was also a task that offered us a lot of opportunities to learn lessons. So now T&O, during these talks that we would give, they were in another room from the big room, which was like a meeting room. And they were behind a wall. You couldn't see them, but they had two little one-way windows that they could look through, and they could hear what was going on. And so they wanted to be there to just monitor the circumstance, to see how the students acted and see how the public acted, what they talked about and things like that. And so we were getting ready for a meeting, and I was there, and the whole class wasn't there all the time. Although some of the class attended the meetings, most of the class was there, I guess, some of the time. But we didn't want to look overwhelmingly like, we were this cult. Anyway, I say we because I wasn't the decider of these things at all. But I was participating in it, so it felt like a we effort. And I was in support of it completely. Anyway, so I was arranging for the meeting. I think I might have been giving the talk at that time. Although there were more than one speaker in any given night. But and so T&O, they situated themselves in this other room, which and I was in the main room where the talk was being given, but it hadn't started yet. I was arranging the chairs and things, and I heard T&O talking. And I went a little closer to the wall, and I could actually make out their words. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if some of the students, some of the people that come, maybe T&O don't know that they can be heard. And what if they're talking when some of the customers or clients or participants are sitting there? To me, that was like a security breach. That depending on what they said, I didn't know, but I was just concerned about it, and that T&O didn't know about it. So I was very hesitant to tell T&O about this because we had procedure not to just barge in on them. And that started actually in Wyoming when we were in campgrounds and they were in a tent and we were in tents, and they said to do that even among each other, that if you wanted to bring something up to another partnership, you would approach their tent and then stand at a distance from their tent until you could see that they saw you, if they were out and about. If they weren't out and about, if they were like inside the tent, you wouldn't even approach anybody. You're not even fellow students. But if they were out and about, washing their dishes or cooking or then you could approach. But you would approach, and then at some distance of it wasn't determined how far away. But at some distance you would stop and wait, and I'd be with my partner. I'd stop and wait to get the attention of whoever was there without interfering with what they were doing. And the way T&O said it, that even when they are making hot dogs or whatever they were cooking at that time, because at that time we did eat some meats. There wasn't actually any dietary program at that time, although later on we became fruitarians and live food, vegetarians, and then we had meat in our diet in limited amounts, and and well done, and you know, we went through all different kinds of dietary changes, which was lesson material as well as health-related efforts. But because we wanted to keep the vehicle functioning the best way it could, brain and body. And this was under Doe's instruction mostly at that time. But just want to throw that in. But so back at Astrologics, I finally decided after maybe 10 or 15 minutes of wondering whether I should say something to them, and being frightened of doing so, not because they would do anything to me or be mean to me. I just respected them, and I was in awe of them, and I didn't want to do something against procedure. I didn't want to interfere with what they were doing. So I went up to them very hesitantly and at a distance, and I stood there, and they looked up at me, and I said, I hemmed and hawed like I'm doing now, and like I didn't know exactly what to say, and I said, I just feel like I need to tell you that I was, because in a sense I felt like I was correcting them, I was informing them of something they weren't aware of, and I didn't think of them as being somebody that were not aware of a lot of things. But they weren't aware of everything. But even if they weren't aware of everything, they had instructions at times to not be aware of things because they became lesson material for the students, and this was a lesson for me. And so I told them that I could hear them, and they said, well, thank you. And that was it. And then I wrote a note to Doe about that, or T and Doe about that, but Doe responded to me. I wrote saying, you know, how I was that the wrong thing to do, and he said, no, you were trying to help us. You were trying to be of service. And he said,